In the next half hour, a closer look at the black conservative movement. Leaders are pitching a new way forward for African Americans.
They have been brainwashed by a leftist-leaning media that says Republicans are racist, Democrats are in your corner.
Also, how can Republicans better reach out to black voters? Some advice.
Just because all of them voted for Obama doesn't mean that they're satisfied with Obama. But if you don't come with them with some kind of message, there has to be a change.
And he's causing presidential tremors. Ben Carson has black conservatives excited.
What he has picked up on is an essential, universal theme of folks who love liberty.
Join us next for our special Black Conservatives, Faith, Race, and Politics. And welcome to Washington, everyone. I'm David Brody. You're going to hear very little from me, and instead, some of the top black conservative leaders in the country are going to provide their remedy for black families across America. That's because our One America News team was behind the scenes and on the ground at the recent Black Conservative Summit held in Washington, D.C. The event brought together a community of leaders dedicated to finding ways to shift the way people view matters of faith, race, and public policy within the black community. Now, two big themes are going to come up in this show: family and church. And so we begin with what many in the black conservative movement believe is the number one issue for African Americans in America, and that is the breakdown of the family. Look, the statistics are startling. Roughly 67% of African American kids under 18 are in a single parent home. The out-of-wedlock birth rate is at 72%. African Americans are actually incarcerated at nearly 6 times the rate of white Americans. The black teenager unemployment rate, a whopping 38%. 21% is the average teen unemployment rate, so this list does indeed go on. Black conservatives at the summit say restoring the family is the place to start.
One of the reasons why I'm so committed to the idea of rebuilding families, rebuilding the black family in particular, because it suffers so much with some of the government policies that we've seen since the 60s, because I know the transformative impact that my dad had on my life. He brought authority. He brought a sense of discipline, a sense of vision. I tell people, calling me conservative, I say, is really not accurate, because really what I am is a Bill Jackson child. I was taught the values that I have by my dad. And so I don't even think of them in ideological terms. I think of them in practical terms of what should a human being do in life? How should they conduct themselves? And my dad told me, no excuses. It's up to you to make your own way, overcome obstacles, and deal with the challenges. And don't come back to me with excuses. Go out there and do it.
We have to do something to help build that family, because that family itself, everything balloons from that. So usually in terms of even high school dropout rates, I mean, you just go, and then people that come from broken families also end up being in a broken family. I mean, the divorce rate, all these things that I mentioned, the abortion rate, listen, AIDS. I mean, AIDS in the black community, 13% of the population. But again, you're talking about 35, 40% of those that have AIDS, 50% with black women. It's pathetic. It's almost everything that happens in America bad is worse in the black community. So you have to start with the family.
And then there is the whole welfare issue. Right now, there are roughly 13 million people on welfare in this country, but then you have to add another 47 million who are on food stamps. 40% of the recipients are black, about 39% are white. But when you factor in that African Americans make up just 13% of the country's population, then it puts it into even more severe context, according to black conservatives.
When you have a situation where it's decade after decade and generation after generation stuck in poverty, that means you're not protecting the youngsters. And one of the things that I would want to see would be some type of welfare reform where if you're getting help from the government, you have got to be up and out of the house every day. That means you're going to get either training or you're doing some volunteer work. If a person doesn't have a work ethic, they don't have a chance in the competitive world we live in.
All right, so now let's get into the controversy over who's at fault. Look, we can trace this back to the famous War on Poverty speech by LBJ in the 1960s.
This administration today here and now, declares unconditional war on poverty in America.
That speech marked a turning point in providing more government assistance to people in poverty. Now, liberals say LBJ's war on poverty is working. They cite how poverty has declined more than 1/3 since 1967. But conservatives say, hold on a moment, those figures are being spun and that the poverty rate is essentially unchanged. But more than that, the federal government in the last 50 years has spent over $22 trillion on a problem that really hasn't solved the root of the actual problem. Black conservatives say it's these dependent-type programs that have hurt black Americans, not to mention all Americans. Where exactly do you believe the war on poverty either went right or wrong, and how that's affected the African-American community?
Well, I think it went wrong, way awry, when it started rewarding people, in a sense, for living lifestyles that were not conducive to the community's growth. In other words, if I give single mom a financial incentive to not get married because they got more money and perks if the man's not in the house, that actually encourages family breakdown. And sociologically, we know if you're from an intact home, you're going to do better in school. If you live in an intact home, you're not going to wind up with the same kind of juvenile delinquent rates. You're not going to wind up in poverty or in prison. And so I think we have been done a disservice by that government as God equation. And that's a little intense language, but that's, as a theological person, that's how I see it. Many liberals, many in the Democratic Party who are not blue dog Democrats, kind of social conservatives, almost lift government in the nanny state, if you will, to a status almost of God. Whereas the conservatives tend to want to give personal freedoms and liberty so that people, under the guidance of God, can find their own destiny.
All right, so where does all of this leave black Americans? Well, look, there is a choice, and for decades they have been aligning with the Democrat Party. Overall, roughly 69% of African Americans vote for the Democrat. But this is interesting. Take a look. That figure used to be higher. In 1984, it was at 78%, so it has come down. And black conservatives like Ben Kinchlow say it's time for black Americans to stop believing the big Democrat lie.
They have been brainwashed by a leftist-leaning media that says Republicans are racist, Democrats are in your corner. The truth of the matter is all of the civil rights legislation, from the amendments to the Constitution, all the way down to the 1964-1965 Civil Rights Act, were all passed by Republican majorities.
All right, we have much more ahead, including how the controversy over same-sex marriage could be a big opening for black conservatives to preach their message. We're back in a moment from Washington. And welcome back to Washington and our One America News special. With the midterm elections approaching, Democrats are going to need African American voters to turn out in big numbers to win many key races in the House and the Senate. But look, President Obama is turning into a drag on black voters as well. Have a look at some of these numbers. In 2012, President Obama got reelected with 93% from African Americans. Today, his approval rating among them, 86%. However, here's the key number. His disapproval number is 12%. That's actually double what it was in 2012. Ben Kinchlow, one of the speakers at the summit, has a theory as to why the president was elected in the first place, and the answer is definitely black and white. Let's be honest. A lot of African-American conservatives voted for Barack Obama. There were quite a few who decided, well, I got my conservative principles, but I also want to see history made.
Yes.
And so how do you take me through that psychologically and how that manifests and what happens there?
Well, one of the reasons that, in my opinion, that President Obama got elected was because whites wanted to prove that they were not racist as they had been are, pointed out to be. All whites are racist, and whites said, I'm not racist. So many of them voted against their principles to prove that they were not racist by voting for a man about whom they knew almost nothing, because the media covered up, anything about his background. Nobody knew anything about Barack Obama. Here's a man who never had a job, never had a real job, never ran even a small business. And now he's in charge of the greatest economy, the greatest country on the face of the earth. And blacks voted for him, of course, because he was black. Many of them who disagreed with him voted because he was black. But the problem was, many whites went against their deeply ingrained philosophical positions to vote for him just to prove that they were not racist. And I think that's a problem that we have in America. That was the problem that led to the election of President Barack Obama.
Some food for thought from Ben Kinchlow. When it comes to the African American community, the hot political issues of the day are front and center, and black conservatives are speaking out on them. Take what's going on in Ferguson, Missouri. We know all about the racial tension in the city after a white cop shot a black teenager. But black conservative Garland Hunt believes the focus needs to be on reconciliation.
What's the real core here? It's the need for true racial reconciliation. I mean, there has to be, blacks and whites have to find a place where we can really relate and trust and love. And that's not going to come from throwing rocks at each other. But nor is it going to come from the media just looking at the exterior and just say, well, y'all a bunch of rioters, and y'all look, but really, that guy tried to beat up the officer. Y'all not listening to what really happened. Okay, that's not really the issue. Really what's the cry from the streets right now is what's justice. And really justice is fairness. If a person commits a crime, if a white person does a crime, black person does a crime, do they serve the same punishment that a black person? That's really all they're asking, which is what we want for fairness. That's the balance of what we want justice really to be. So someone needs to help explain that and then go deeper into it to say, how do we find true appreciation, respect, and love for one another, because we're all in this same boat together.
There's also another big hot topic right now, and that, of course, is the marriage issue. This very well could be an area that hurts the Democrat Party when it comes to courting favor with the African American community, and that is because 70% of African Americans say homosexual behavior is a sin. Just 40% of whites think it's sinful. In addition, African Americans are also not as supportive on the gay marriage issue, so this leads Bishop E.W. Jackson to make a strong declaration.
I believe that this marriage issue that has arisen here in the last 5 years, really, and particularly accelerated since the president came out in support of same-sex marriage, I think is giving a lot of people pause. I think for the first time you had many black ministers speak against the president, or at least against his policy when he came out in favor of same-sex marriage. And I think I'm increasingly talking to black pastors saying to their people, don't vote party, vote principle.
Moving on now to the abortion issue. This is a huge one. It has deeply impacted the black community, and the numbers don't lie. Since 1973, roughly 16 million black babies have been aborted. That's about 2,000 a day. By the way, in New York City alone, black women are aborting more than half of their pregnancies. And statistics show black women are more than 5 times as likely as white women to have an abortion. Now, black conservatives at the D.C. summit have a pretty simple take on this. They want to know this: why would African Americans want to be on the side of Democrats and liberals who are pushing the abortion agenda? To them, it seems more than a little nonsensical.
We were like 12 to 13% of the population, but when you have almost 40% of the abortions that take place in the black community, we have to look at this. I mean, in almost every area, the black community is tremendously impacted by some of the very things that the liberal community promotes.
One last hot topic, a big one in the news: immigration. Black conservatives, just like white conservatives, have a secure the border first mentality. But there is also another economic element that's a big part of the equation for black conservatives.
When you have millions of illegal aliens coming in and competing in the workforce, we already have a very large segment of the black community that has maybe a GED or less, who are competing for low-skilled jobs. That fits the profile of many of the illegal immigrants who are coming over. So it creates immediate competition for a group of people who are already unemployed at twice the national average.
Immigration, marriage, abortion, race relations, all part of the discussion as black conservatives try and make their case. All right, when we come back, he is black, he's conservative, and he has the nation's attention. More on the curious case of Ben Carson for president. We're back in a moment. And welcome back to Washington and our One America News special as we take a closer look at the black conservative movement in America. You know, when it comes to big, influential names in the African American community today, a lot of folks point to Al Sharpton, Jesse Jackson, other liberals like them. But there is an impressive list of black conservatives out there currently as well. How about Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, economist Thomas Sowell, Star Parker, Senator Tim Scott down in South Carolina. Then you have a couple former congressmen, J.C. Watts and Allan West down in Florida. And how could we forget former presidential candidate Herman Cain, the Herminator? Speaking of presidential candidates, Dr. Ben Carson is now on the scene. He's making waves about running for president. The world-famous retired neurosurgeon is seriously considering running in 2016 and seems a likely bet to jump in. He has the conservative world buzzing with his no-nonsense approach to politics and disdain for political correctness.
I will continue to defy the PC police who have tried in many cases to shut me up. You know, I actually find them pretty amusing.
So what's the take on Carson among black conservative summit attendees?
His message is a message that is old as Frederick Douglass. It is old as many of the leaders in the civil rights movement, leaders that I interacted with, like Reverend Fred Shuttlesworth. This is one where what he has picked up on is an essential universal theme of folks who love liberty.
All of this talk about Ben Carson for president brings up a much larger issue, and it is simply this. Overall, the current Republican Party has been pretty much out to lunch when it comes to voter outreach within the African American community. They see the numbers of how African Americans vote pretty much for Democrats, and they probably figure, look, they have no shot. However, that is starting to change. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul will most likely run for president. He's blazing a new trail. He's visiting the Urban League in Cincinnati, Howard University as well. He's also trying to pass bills that would help black Americans in areas like the criminal justice system, voting rights. He recently said that he believes the Republican presidential candidate in 2016 could get 1/3 or more of the African American vote if, this is the big if the message is centered on criminal justice reform, school choice, and economic empowerment. And then, of course, there's Congressman Paul Ryan, another possible presidential candidate. For the last year or so, he has been going to some of the poorest communities in America. It's part of a listening tour. Ryan's been beat up by liberals who think his fiscal, conservative, anti-poverty agenda has no compassion in it. But he's trying to change that perception about not only himself, but the GOP too. Some of the talk here was indeed about how the GOP needs to preach and explain a more compassionate message.
There is a new generation of people who are emerging that could shift and change the image, but they have not. I think the Republicans have not been comfortable talking about race. They have not been comfortable talking about poverty, and I think it's hurt them.
Well, clearly the GOP is fighting an uphill battle on this perception that they're not a compassionate party towards those in poverty. As a matter of fact, you're going to hear many liberal Democrats who believe the GOP is anti-black. That's right, I said it. It gets people like Dr. Eric Wallace extremely frustrated. Wallace is founder of the Freedom's Journal Institute. It's the organization that sponsored the Black Conservative Summit here in D.C.
They have been so good at painting us the wrong way. And part of it, I believe, is because of the 64 Civil Rights Act. You had Goldwater vote against it. But what they don't tell you is that Goldwater voted for, I think, the 57 Civil Rights Act and the 60 Civil Rights Act. He just had a problem with 64, and his problem was not that he didn't want civil rights for black folks, is that he didn't like the fact that the federal government was given too much power to go in and tell a private individual, you know, who you could sell to. who you had to sell to. He thought the federal government had no business being involved in what a small business was doing. And I agree with him 100%. So we haven't told our story very well.
By the way, we should point out that Wallace's Freedoms Journal Institute is promoting 4 basic principles within the urban community, all through a biblical perspective. They are called the RISE principles, R-I-S-E, and here they are: responsible government, individual liberty and fidelity, strong family values, and economic empowerment. That is the Black conservative message in a nutshell. All right, we're back next with some uplifting personal stories within the Black conservative community. You don't want to miss it. We're back in a moment. Welcome back to Washington, our special show on the Black conservative movement. You know, everybody in life has a story. Some have a bit more drama than others. Take Mark Little, for example. You saw him earlier in the show. He is an accomplished lawyer, author, entrepreneur. But did you know that he came from a broken home? He was raised by a single mom. Oh, one more thing. He was shot at point blank range. He sure has overcome a lot.
I moved out to California from Connecticut in 1983 to attend the University of Southern California. When I graduated, I was accosted by a Crip, an 18-year-old Crip, who brandished a 12-gauge shotgun. And he said, "You better give me $100, at least $100. Well, I was a student living off of peanut butter and jelly, and so I didn't have $100. And so my hands went in the air. He turned the gun around and he hit me with it, thank God, and he didn't shoot me at that moment. I threw myself to the ground in hopes that he would go away. He didn't go away. He cocked the 12-gauge shotgun and he shot me. The gunshot basically hit my right leg in the main artery and literally blew my leg off for all intents and purposes. And I went from that to 4 months of hospitalization, trying to really pick the pieces of my life up from there. I ultimately suffered a amputation of my entire right leg and had to learn to walk again. When I was shot, I came out and didn't know what I was going to do. And I found myself on a victim's assistance check. And I was sitting at home, and as soon as I came out of the hospital virtually, after collecting this check while I was in the hospital, I came out of the hospital and I went to work 2 jobs. My mother didn't raise me to sit around.
Encouraging words from a leader in the Black conservative community. So here is another interesting story, this one about Glo Smith. When Glo was born, her mom was just 20 years old. She was on welfare. Well, now Glo is running for Congress as a conservative Republican down in Florida. Her district is more than 50% Black, 60% Democrats. So running as a Black conservative woman is a challenge. And she's been a victim of some hate down in her district. Have a listen.
Back in June, my husband and I had been putting up signs out, and we had a friend that had personal property off of a major interstate in Jacksonville, Interstate 10. The next day when my husband went by there, he noticed that the sign was knocked down, so we assumed that the rain had knocked it down. Well, when he went to go and find out what happened to the sign, he noticed that my face had been painted white. Now, to this day, we don't know who did it. I did not worry about filing a police report. It was an incident, honestly, that we prayed about for probably 5 days before we even posted this picture on Facebook, because we didn't want that picture to be the face of this campaign. And so we prayed about it, and on Sunday we ended up putting it on the website, and it just immediately just took off. I mean, people, great American people, were so offended by it and so hurt by it that someone would do this. And it was an opportunity for us to really get national attention for the campaign that we never expected. But more importantly, we got to meet great Americans who said, you know what, we don't care about the color of your skin. What's your platform? What's your message? What do you want to do for America? Why are you running this race?
I love how there is always a glow on Glo's face. It is great to see, even through that tough incident. Now, before we sign off, we leave you with some encouraging words from the always insightful, always quotable Bishop E.W. Jackson. It's his message to the young Black youth of today who might be watching this show right now in living rooms across America.
Well, I would say to them, I grew up poor, black, in the ghetto, and yet I've been tremendously blessed. That opportunity is there for you, but you have to decide what narrative you will accept. If you accept the narrative that you're a victim, that the country is inherently unjust, that they or the man or whatever construct you choose to use won't let you, you can be an abject failure and you can find plenty of justification for it. You can be an immense success if you decide that regardless of what obstacles may be there, be they race, be they economic, be they social, whatever obstacles are there, you're going to face them and overcome them. You're going to get a good education. You're going to develop skills. You're going to be a decent human being with good character. The sky is the limit for you.
Not much else is left to say. From Washington, I'm David Brody. Thanks for joining us.